I left my reading glasses on the exam table at Dr. Harmon's office and didn't realize it until I was pulling out of the parking lot. I turned around. 20 minutes, maybe less. When I walked back in, the receptionist wasn't at the front desk. I could hear my name coming from the hallway. Elena, the nurse who'd been handling my checkups for 3 months, was on the phone, her voice low and urgent. She didn't hear me come in. "The levels are wrong again," she was saying. "I'm telling you, something is off with his medication. This isn't normal aging. Someone needs to look at what he's actually taking." She turned and saw me standing there. The color left her face. "Mr. Calloway," she said. Then she said nothing else for a long moment, just stared at me the way people stare when they've been caught telling the truth. "Sit down," she finally said. "Please, I need to show you something, but I need you to promise me you won't walk out of here and do something rash." I almost laughed. "I'm 66 years old," I told her. "I haven't done anything rash in 30 years. She looked at me with steady brown eyes. "That's about to change," she said. "My name is Robert Calloway. I built Calloway Creek Ranch from 40 acres of scrubland in central Kentucky into one of the most respected thoroughbred breeding operations east of the Mississippi. 312 acres now, 17 championship bloodlines. A reputation that took me 40 years to build, one foal, one race, one handshake at a time. My late wife Carol helped me name the first barn. She said we should call it Hope, because that's what you're selling when you sell a racehorse. You're selling someone's dream of winning." She was right about most things. When she died 4 years ago, ovarian cancer, I threw myself back into the work because the work didn't ask me how I was holding up. The horses needed feeding whether I was grieving or not. That's the mercy of a working ranch. It keeps moving, and eventually, you move with it. My daughter Diana had been watching me slow down for about a year. She noticed before I did, or so she said. "Dad, you seem tired. Dad, you missed the Keeneland auction you used to love. Dad, your hands are shaking again." She said it the way you say something you've rehearsed, with just the right amount of worry in your voice. Her husband Preston would nod along beside her, his jaw set in that practiced expression of concern. Preston had never loved horses. He loved what horses could become on a balance sheet. He'd been pushing me to consolidate the breeding operation for 2 years, sell off the older bloodlines, modernize, go corporate. I told him what I'd told every suit who'd walked through my gate. Calloway Creek isn't a portfolio. It's a promise. 3 months before Elena found my glasses, I'd started having trouble. Not dramatic trouble, subtle. I'd forget a horse's name I'd known for 8 years. I'd walk into the tack room and stand there, unable to remember why I'd come. The dizziness was the worst part. It would hit me in the middle of the afternoon, a rolling wave of disorientation that left me gripping the fence rail until it passed. Dr. Harmon had run tests, cognitive screening, blood work, and MRI. His conclusion was measured but honest. "The early signs are consistent with age-related vascular changes," he told me. "Your blood pressure medication may need adjustment. Nothing alarming yet. But I'd recommend limiting stress and considering some help with the day-to-day management of the property." Diana had been there for that appointment. She held my hand in the waiting room. On the drive home, she was very quiet. And then she said, softly, like it had just occurred to her, "Preston and I have been talking about a power of attorney. Just as a precaution, Dad. So someone can handle things if a decision needs to be made quickly." I told her I'd think about it. The ranch was worth somewhere north of $80 million. The bloodlines alone were appraised at 34. I understood why she was asking. I just didn't understand yet why she was really asking. Elena sat me down in the exam room and pulled up my medication records on her computer. She'd been cross-referencing my lab results for 3 months, she said. Something hadn't added up from the beginning. My blood pressure readings were erratic in a way that didn't match my prescription dosage. My cognitive symptoms were progressing faster than vascular changes of my severity typically progressed. She'd asked to look at my medication bottle 3 weeks ago under the pretense of a routine medication review. She'd photographed the pills. Then she'd sent the photos to a pharmacist friend of hers. The pills in my bottle were not metoprolol, my prescribed blood pressure medication. They were a sedative compound, low dose, cumulative in effect. Take them every day for 3 months and you'd feel like you were aging a decade a year. Confusion, fatigue, dizziness, memory gaps. Every symptom I'd been experiencing, manufactured, not natural. "Who fills your prescriptions?" Elena asked me. "Diana picks them up for me," I said. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, like it was coming from somewhere far away. Diana had offered 3 months ago. Said it was on her way. I hadn't thought twice about it. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I could drive. Not because I was too upset to function, though I was. Because I needed to think clearly before I did a single thing, and thinking clearly meant making a decision right there in that parking lot about what kind of man I was going to be for the next however many days it took to end this. I could confront Diana. I could call the police. I could call my attorney. All of those were options I'd discard later as premature. What I needed first was proof that held up, not a nurse's photographs of pills. Something that connected the medication to whoever had substituted it, and connected that person to a reason. The ranch. Always the ranch. I drove home by a longer route, past the old Whitmore property on Route 9. The name came to me slow, the way names do when you've tried to stop thinking about someone. Dale Whitmore. We'd been partners once, 15 years ago. He'd put up the capital for the North Pasture expansion. I'd put up the land and the expertise. 2 years in, he'd pushed to take the operation public. IPO, outside investors, quarterly earnings pressure. I'd bought him out instead, paid him a fair price. He'd told me I was throwing away the future of the property. I'd told him I knew my ranch better than any investor ever would. He'd sold the Whitmore property 6 months later and moved to Lexington, and I hadn't thought about Dale Whitmore since. Until now. Preston had worked in commercial real estate finance before he married Diana. I knew he consulted with various investment groups. I'd never thought to ask which ones. I did not go back on my medication. That was the first decision. I bought supplements from the feed store that I knew wouldn't interact with anything. Slipped them into the prescription bottle Diana didn't know I'd already emptied. Every morning at breakfast, I performed the ritual. Shaking the bottle, swallowing what she thought was her compound, pressing my hand to the table as though dizzy, squinting at the newspaper headlines I could read perfectly. I was good at it. You get good at things you've practiced without knowing you were practicing. I'd been performing fine for 3 years since Carol died. This was just another performance, except this one had a purpose. My cognitive function began returning within 4 days, not dramatically. The fog thinned at the edges first. I stopped reaching for words that used to come easy. The horses' names came back to me unprompted, each one attached to its history and bloodline and particular stubbornness, the way they'd always lived in my memory. By the end of the first week, I felt like myself again. Sharp and angry and methodical, the way I'd always been when someone tried to take something that wasn't theirs to take. Marcus Webb had managed my stables for 22 years. He'd come to me at 19 years old with nothing but a feel for horses that you couldn't teach. He understood them the way some people understand music, intuitively, deeply, in his body. He'd turned down better-paying jobs twice that I knew about, and probably more that I didn't. His wife Rosa had worked the ranch books for 8 years. They were the kind of people who made a place what it was. I called Marcus on a Tuesday evening and asked him to meet me at the old stone wall on the east pasture. The one Carol had insisted we never tear down because the lichen on it was beautiful. He came without asking questions. That was Marcus. I told him everything in about 12 minutes. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he looked out across the pasture for a while. Then he said, "I noticed Diana going into the tack room medication cabinet twice last month. I didn't think anything of it then. I said, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to trust me completely until Friday morning, when I'll explain everything else." He said, "You've never given me a reason not to trust you in 22 years. Tell me what you need." I needed the breeding records moved. Not the horses, the records. 40 years of documentation on every bloodline, every foal, every championship result, every health history, physical files and digital backups. The records were what made the bloodlines legally mine to sell or transfer or protect. Without them, the breeding operation's value dropped by 30% overnight, because you couldn't prove the lineage that justified the price. Marcus had a brother-in-law in Frankfurt who operated a document storage facility. We moved everything in 3 trips over 2 nights. Diana and Preston were in Lexington both nights for reasons they'd mentioned casually at dinner. I wondered now how casually those reasons had been arranged. Thursday afternoon, I drove to Lexington without telling anyone where I was going. I'd found the connection 3 days earlier, when I'd searched Preston's name alongside every investment group connected to Kentucky horse breeding. Whitmore Capital Management, incorporated 18 months ago. Dale Whitmore, founder and managing partner. Preston Albright, listed as senior advisor. The company had made 2 acquisition offers in the last year for thoroughbred breeding operations in a 3-county radius. Both had been declined. Calloway Creek was the obvious third target. 80+ million in assets, an aging sole owner with documented cognitive decline, a daughter on the inside, and a power of attorney in progress. From where they were sitting, this must have looked like a very clean deal. I found a private investigator in Lexington named Sandra Cho who came recommended by my attorney's office. I told her what I needed and she told me what it would cost, and we shook hands across a desk covered in folders. I need phone records and meeting documentation between Preston Albright and Dale Whitmore going back 20 months, I said. And I need to know where the substitute medication came from and who purchased it. She said she'd have what she could find by Thursday night. She called at 11:15. The medication, a controlled sedative compound, had been purchased through a medical supply reseller in Nashville. The credit card used was a corporate account belonging to Whitmore Capital Management. Preston had attended 11 documented meetings with Dale Whitmore at Whitmore's Lexington office. The most recent was 2 weeks ago. Friday morning, I stood at Carol's photograph on the mantel in the study. It was the one from our first Kentucky Derby, before we'd ever had a horse in the race, when we were just 2 people in the crowd, in love with the whole thundering spectacle of it. She'd worn a yellow dress and a hat she'd bought at a consignment shop in Versailles, and she'd looked like the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in my life. "I'm going to finish this today," I told her, "the way you would have wanted me to." With evidence on the table and witnesses in the room, she wouldn't have wanted anything done in the dark. I had called our family attorney, George Parrish, on Wednesday morning. George had been handling Calloway estate matters for 16 years. I told him what I needed. He was quiet for a moment and then said, "I'll have the right people there." He was also the one who'd contacted Detective Anna Briley at the Woodford County Sheriff's Office. I'd known Anna for 12 years through the local business association. She was professional and precise, and she called me back within the hour. "I'll be outside the building," she told me. "Give me the signal when you're ready, and not a moment before. I want this airtight, Robert." "Me too," I said. Diana had called me Thursday evening to confirm. "Dad, we'll meet at George's office at 10. The new documents are ready." I made my voice sound small and tired, the voice I'd been practicing all week. "I know, sweetheart. I just want this done." She made a sound that was almost tenderness. "Almost. You're doing the right thing," she said. "This is for your protection." I arrived at George's office at 9:45 in my good wool jacket, the one Carol had given me for my 62nd birthday. I wanted to look like myself, not the version Diana had spent 3 months manufacturing, hunched and uncertain and grateful to be guided. Myself. Diana and Preston arrived at 10 sharp. Diana looked briefly surprised when she saw me standing straight near the window, holding my coffee without any tremor in my hands. She recovered quickly. "Dad," she said and kissed my cheek. Preston shook my hand with both of his, the grip of a man who thinks warmth can be performed on command. When the door opened and Dale Whitmore walked in, Diana didn't react at all. Preston's jaw tightened slightly. George watched from behind his desk with the careful expression of a man who has agreed to witness something significant. I hadn't told George everything. I'd told him enough. Dale looked the same as he had 15 years ago, a little heavier, hair completely gray now, the same confidence in his shoulders that I'd once respected and now recognized as something less generous than confidence. "Dale," I said. He stopped moving. His expression rearranged itself through several things before settling on smooth. "Robert, it's been a long time, has it?" I gestured to the chair across from George's desk. "Sit down." He looked at Preston. Preston was looking at the floor. "Something's wrong," Dale said. His voice had lost the smoothness already. I set Sandra Cho's folder on George's desk. Whitmore Capital Management purchased a controlled sedative compound from a Nashville medical supplier 11 weeks ago on a corporate account. That compound was substituted for my blood pressure medication by someone with access to my prescriptions. My lab work over the past 3 months documents the cumulative effects. I picked up the first page of the lab report and held it so he could see the numbers. My blood pressure readings, my cognitive screening results, my pharmacological blood panel from 3 days ago after I'd stopped taking the substituted medication. 12 points of improvement in 1 week. The room was very quiet. Diana's hand had moved to her collarbone. Preston hadn't looked up from the floor. George's hands were flat on his desk. Dale leaned back in his chair and I watched him calculate. "This is a serious allegation," he said. "It's a documented fact," I said. I spread the phone records across the desk. 11 meetings between you and my son-in-law over 20 months, beginning 6 months after you incorporated Whitmore Capital. 4 of those meetings occurred after my cognitive symptoms began. 3 occurred after Diana first mentioned the power of attorney to me. Diana made a sound, "Dad." Her voice cracked on the single syllable. I turned to look at her. She was my daughter, Carol's daughter. The girl who used to fall asleep in the barn waiting for foals to be born because she didn't want to miss the moment of it. Somewhere between that girl and this woman, something had bent in the wrong direction, and I didn't know when it had happened or whether I could have changed it. I thought about Carol's voice in the hospital, near the end, asking me to take care of Diana, to take care of both of them. I understood now, in a way I hadn't understood then, that taking care of someone sometimes meant stopping them. "Diana," I said, "I'm not going to let you speak right now, because anything you say is going to make this worse for you, and I still love you enough to not want that." She pressed her hand over her mouth. Her eyes filled. I looked at Preston. "You came into my family," I said. "Carol was still alive when you married Diana. She stood in that ceremony and believed you were going to care for her daughter." He didn't say anything. His face had gone a color I'd never seen on a living person's face. Then I looked at Dale. "You had something once," I said to him. "You had a partnership with a man who valued what you brought to the table. I paid you fairly for your share. I offered you more than fair. You built a company on the idea that what I refused to sell you was something you could take instead. You found my son-in-law drowning in bad investment decisions and you handed him a rope that turned out to be a chain. I want you to understand that clearly. You didn't help him. You used him." Dale opened his mouth. I raised my hand. I walked to the window and lifted the blind exactly once. Detective Briley came through the office door 40 seconds later with 2 deputies behind her. She read Dale Whitmore his rights first. He sat absolutely still, like a man who'd always expected this moment and had run out of ways to postpone it. Preston stood when the deputy approached him and immediately began asking about attorneys. Diana sat without moving until a deputy gently placed a hand on her shoulder. Then she looked at me one more time. "Dad." Just that. Just the word. I held her gaze because she deserved that much. Then I looked away, because I could only do so much. The records were safe in Frankfurt. The bloodlines were mine. The ranch was still Calloway Creek, built on 40 years of Carol's faith in me and my father's stubborn belief that the right way to do things was always worth the slower road. I stood at George's window after they'd all been taken out and looked at the street below, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel, which was not victory and not relief, but something quieter, something like the stillness after a storm when the land is still wet and the air is clean for the first time in weeks. 3 weeks later, Marcus and I walked the east pasture at dawn. The mare he'd been nursing through a difficult pregnancy had foaled the night before, a bay colt with a white star on his forehead and the kind of legs that made you stop and look twice. Marcus crouched beside him and ran a careful hand along his flank, and the colt turned and looked at him with the enormous steady eyes that good horses have, the ones that seem to understand more than they're supposed to. "I've been doing some thinking," I told Marcus. He stood without looking at me, still watching the colt. "That's usually followed by something that changes my life," he said. "Something like that." He turned then. I'd had George draw up the documents over the past 2 weeks. I pulled the envelope from my jacket pocket. "This is a co-ownership agreement. 40% of Calloway Creek to you and Rosa, transferable to your children. The management decisions on the breeding operation would require both our signatures going forward." He stared at the envelope in my hand and didn't take it immediately. "Marcus," I said, "you've built as much of this place as I have. You've just been doing it without your name on the deed. That ends today if you want it to." He took the envelope, held it for a moment. Then he said, in that quiet way he had, Carol would have thought this was right. Yes, I said, she would have. She'd told me once, years ago before Diana had grown into whatever she'd grown into, she'd said, Marcus loves this land the way you do, the way you both do. You should tell him that. I'd never gotten around to telling him. I was telling him now. Diana pled guilty 6 months later. Her attorney negotiated a sentence that included no prison time, probation, restitution, and a permanent injunction barring her from any financial interest in Calloway Creek or any Calloway estate property. It was less than she deserved and more than I'd have preferred, and I told George both of those things, and then accepted the outcome, because outcomes are what you work with. Preston received 18 months. Dale Whitmore received 4 years, federal charges related to the medication procurement and the conspiracy to commit financial fraud. He stood in the courtroom without expression when the sentence was read. I didn't attend the sentencing. I had a breeding consultation that morning with a farm in Virginia, and I chose the horses. I still talk to Carol, not in any way I'd admit to most people. But I talk to her when I'm alone in the old barn at dusk, when the horses are settling, and the light comes through the gaps in the boards in long slanted columns of dust and gold. I tell her what happened and what I did about it, and whether I think she'd approve. She was a woman who believed in accountability over anger and in the future over the past, and in people surprising you with their capacity to be better than their worst moments. She believed that about Diana, even now. I was still working on believing it myself. The bay colt from March, Marcus named him First Light. I thought that was exactly right. Some mornings I stand at the fence and watch him move across the pasture. All that energy and precision in a body that doesn't know yet what it's capable of. And I think about what Carol said the day we named the first barn. You're selling someone's dream of winning. That's what we do here. Not for the money, though the money is real and it matters. For the dream, for the thing that wakes a person up before the alarm and keeps them walking the fence line in the cold and makes them believe the next foal, the next season, the next morning might be the one where everything becomes what you always believed it could be. I lost a year to what was done to me. A year of my clarity, my confidence, my mornings. I lost my daughter in a way I'm still learning to carry. I didn't lose the ranch. I didn't lose the bloodlines or the records or the reputation that 4 decades of honest work had built. I didn't lose Marcus or Rosa or the people who showed up every morning because they believed in what we were building here. I didn't lose Carol, because Carol lives in every decision I make that she would have recognized as mine. The land doesn't care about betrayal. It just keeps turning. The grass comes back every spring whether you've earned it or not, and the horses are born every year into whatever world the humans around them have managed to construct, and they run because that's what they were made for, full and unconditional, and without any memory of who wronged whom and when. There's a lesson in that, I think. Not the forgetting part, the running part, the choosing to do the thing you were made for, in spite of everything that tried to stop you. I was made to breed horses and build a legacy and love a woman and work a piece of land until it gave everything it had and then keep working it anyway. That's what I've done for 40 years. That's what I'll keep doing, with Marcus beside me and Carol ahead of me and First Light in the east pasture, finding his legs every morning like it's the first time. The deadliest poisons don't always come in bottles. Sometimes they come wrapped in concern, handed to you at the breakfast table by someone who learned your morning routine by watching you for years. Stay awake to who has access to your life, not in fear, but in clarity. The people who love you show you what they love by what they protect. Watch what people protect. That will tell you everything. What would you have done in my place? Leave a comment, and wherever you're watching from tonight, I'm glad you're here.